Have you ever wondered why the stars of Hollywood made their way to Palm Springs? Well, in this episode, you'll find out why. And you'll also find out about modernism, which is the architecture that made Palm Springs famous.
My name is Michael Stern, and I own a company called The Modern Tour, and we do mid-century modern architectural tours of Palm Springs. On all the tours we do, we go inside houses. So it's not just driving around neighborhoods, we literally go inside houses to show people what the experience of living in Palm Springs is like. Mid-century modern is a movement that happened basically from 1938 to 1970. A lot of people associate mid-century modern with Southern California's take on mid-century modern architecture. And basically what the architects did here is they took the concepts from the Bauhaus in Germany and relaxed them. Whereas the Bauhaus architects were trying to make a statement, Southern Californians took those same ideas of open living, large walls of glass, etc., but made it conducive to the indoor-outdoor experience. And that truly is what Southern California's take on mid-century modern is the fusion of indoors and out because the climate allows for things. And in the East, if you see a modern house that has large walls of glass, they're fixed panes of glass. In Southern California, they're sliding glass doors. So you basically have that immediate access between indoors and outdoors. And in Palm Springs, which is a second home market, this is the living room. Basically, your outdoor space becomes your entertainment space. Donald Wexler is the architect of these houses, and these are called the steel houses. And Don originally hailed from the Midwest and moved to California and was kind of a classic California modernist, basically. Very understated, very, very clean, large walls of glass. The structural elements are exposed. Don loved structure. And you can see in this house how like these large beams are very articulated. They're not basically hidden. They're sort of a statement about the architecture. And these houses are literally all steel. The roof is steel, the walls are steel. It's not just steel frame, these are steel houses. When this house is sort of adjacent to the windmills, and the windmills that's one of the windiest spots in the North American continent. And those windmills provide enough power to power the entire valley that Palm Springs is in. They don't, it just goes back into the grid, but that's the quantity of energy that they produce. So the steel houses are like tanks, basically. So it's very conducive to being in a windy area to have these houses just basically made out of solid steel, essentially. So this particular house is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. This was the first mid-century modern building in Palm Springs to be so designated. And it really is an important statement because it means the house can't be altered. So the current owner wants the house to be preserved for future generations without any remodeling going on. He wants it to be as close to the original design as it can possibly be. And there were many architects who practiced in Palm Springs. The major architects who were Palm Springs architects was Donald Wexler, designer of this house and Palm Springs Airport, Easterwood Williams, who designed the Palm Springs Art Museum, the Architecture and Design Center, Frank Sinatra's house, and many important buildings in town. Albert Frey, who worked with the French artist Le Corbusier in Paris and came to the desert and really brought modernism to the desert. Albert was the first modernist to practice in Palm Springs. And if he hadn't come to Palm Springs, who knows if modernism would have become such an entrenched style here. But he's literally the individual that brought that to the desert. And William Kreisel is a Los Angeles-based architect, and Kreisel designed houses called Alexanders. He was a big architect for the Alexander firm. And the Alexanders, what's amazing about them is when you go through their tracks, the interior of the houses is identical from house to house, but they vary the exteriors and the roof lines. So it would feel like a neighborhood as opposed to a tract. And Bill Cody is another one of the prominent architects, and Easterwood Williams said about William Cody, he brought Fifth Avenue to the desert. So his style was very elegant and very understated. And he was a big country club architect, basically. So he did Tamara's Country Club, Thunderbird Country Club, and Rancho Mirage, and many of the houses that are located on the country clubs. Richard Neutra designed the most famous house in Palm Springs, and that is the Kaufmann House. And the Kaufmann House is sort of memorialized in a very famous photograph by Slim Aarons. And what's beautiful about the Kaufmann House is the way it's set against the mountains. So it's geometric, but he brought natural materials in to make it one with the desert. Even though it stands apart in its geometric shapes, it also blends in because of the use of natural materials. Palm Springs in the mid-century years was exclusively second homes, basically. Season was November to April. April 2nd, you could lie down in Palm Canyon Drive, which is the main street in town, and nobody would run over you. The hotels closed down, the restaurants closed down. The only people that were here were the architects and contractors working on the houses for the next season. So it was like a ghost town in summer, and that's really changed. And the trajectory of Palm Springs basically is, in the late 19th century, it was founded largely as a tuberculosis sanitarium. In the 1920s, Hollywood discovered Palm Springs. And there's a very specific relationship between Palm Springs and Hollywood. And that is, during the years of the studio system, there was a clause in the actors' contracts that stated they could not travel more than 120 miles from Los Angeles while they were filming. Palm Springs is in that 120-mile radius and obviously has a very different kind of energy than Los Angeles does. There was another rule that was enforced by the studios that stated photographers could not photograph the stars in Palm Springs without their consent. And because the studios ruled Hollywood with such an iron fist, every photographer knew if they crossed the studios, their career would end that day. They'd all be blackballed. So everyone kowtowed to the rule, which gave the stars the ability to have affairs and get really plastered. They're the ones that turned Palm Springs into a party town. So from the 1920s through the 1960s, Palm Springs is very chic and glamorous. 70s and 80s, people wanted to live on a golf course, and Palm Springs was largely built out, so the money moved east to Rancho Mirage, Indian Wells, and places like that. Then in the mid-90s, mid-century modern architecture became recognized, and that's what put Palm Springs on the map. So the renaissance of Palm Springs is entirely due to its architecture. It's sort of what Art Deco did for Miami Beach, mid-century modern has done for Palm Springs. And in the last 5 years, the glamour is back now. And you have people like Leonardo DiCaprio buying houses here. So it is all of a sudden Palm Springs is a chic and glamorous place once again, which it had not been for decades. And it literally is because of the architecture. When you go inside a good mid-century, you can literally feel the optimism of that era in post-war American culture. I mean, it really just is an emotional experience. And if you go to a new build that tries to do a mid-century modern, they're really not able to capture that feeling because it was part of the culture at the time. And unfortunately, most of the architects have passed away who did the original mid-century modern architecture. Bill Cody never saw recognition of his work in his lifetime, but Stu Williams did, Albert Frey did, and Don Wexler did. And Don just passed away 2 years ago. So he saw a lot of recognition. And Don was a very humble person. A lot of people think of architects as being extremely egotistical. His attitude was, I was just trying to support my family. What's all the ruckus about? So he didn't even understand why this work was getting so much attention. And ultimately, I think he did come to realize that it was a very specific kind of work that was done in this very specific place. And a lot of the architects were inspired by the beautiful natural landscape of Palm Springs. And the mountains, everything basically plays into the mountains. And when you drive through the neighborhoods, you can literally see the color of the buildings ties into the color of the mountains. There is no ordinance that states that. If you want to, you can paint your house bright orange. But it kind of happened on an organic level that people wanted to create a link between nature and architecture. And that truly is the gist of what Palm Springs is about. William Kreisel, the architect of the Alexander homes, is still alive. He just turned 93 a couple of weeks ago, and up until maybe 3 years ago, he was still doing the landscaping at several of the houses that he designed. There is an area in North Palm Springs called the Uptown Design District, and that's where most of the mid-century modern furnitures are clustered, as well as some of the best restaurants in Palm Springs. And Uptown Design District really is part of the Renaissance of Palm Springs. It was like forgotten, basically. It was very far in the north, and now there's all these wonderful stores selling both vintage and new modern furniture. But you can really find some absolute gems that these people scour the globe for, and it's available for you to buy in Palm Springs. And one of the things that sort of changed Palm Springs is the Coachella Music Festival. Because that brought millennials to Palm Springs and introduced them to the desert, now there's a series of hotels that base or cater to that generation. And the average age in Palm Springs is now 40 years old. In Rancho Mirage, it's 68. So Palm Springs attracts a much more youthful demographic. And once a year, they do something called Modernism Week, and it is an amazing experience. A lot of houses will open up to the public that are never open to the public. There's tours, fabulous lectures. Last year, I think 75,000 people came for Modernism Week. So it's become a big event in Palm Springs. And cultural tourism is now a very key ingredient in the marketing of Palm Springs, basically. People come just for the architecture. And on the tours we do, we've had people fly in on their private planes, take the tour, and then fly out. So information on our tours, our website is themoderntour.com. And you can find out information about the tours, and we are the official tour of the Architecture and Design Center of the Palm Springs Art Museum.
Don't forget to give us a like and subscribe to our channel.